Welcome Internet to Psychologist Casual Review, and today we're going to be reviewing the short and very interesting article of Nancy McWilliams titled Some Thoughts About the Schizoid Dynamics. So this article is brilliant on many levels. First and foremost, I think it's the perfect introduction to the schizoid phenomena, because she's going to blend in three things: clinical understanding, theoretical insight, and personal anecdotal stories, but always linked to the schizoid process. And the combination is well done and well worth reading, I feel, because she both gives a very clear picture of what schizoid means, and she also kind of puts it in a different light and brings in new elements that, on the contrary, destigmatize the schizoid phenomena rather than re-stigmatize it as it can be done. Because for her, and I agree with her point of view, which is, one would say, the Gunship and Fernburn point of view, but in a more casual article and written in a more casual way, but which brings in more insight and is easier to read, so it's kind of really good. So for McWilliams, there is this very interesting starting point, which is that basically she wants to break off with the DSM and the version of schizoid of the DSM, because according to her, the DSM is virtually a caricature of the process. Like, it's one part of it, but it's been cut off and isolated, whereas it's a whole spectrum for McWilliams. And that spectrum is one of insight and of self-reflection, and it's not just defined by isolation or lack of relationships as it could be in the DSM. Quite the contrary. For McWilliams, the schizoid is first and foremost a phenomenological phenomenon, meaning it's something to do with the subjectivity and how the schizoid individual experiences the world and himself. And for McWilliams, that understanding, that phenomenology, is basically inwards. The schizoid individual is internalizing a lot of elements and having and developing an internal world, a creativity of his own that's very important, and it's something that's going to go far beyond the creativity of the average person. And that's something that's very interesting, because for McWilliams, schizoid is not illness, not in of itself. What is going to become pathological is if the schizoid individual wants to do something but can't because they are blocked or they have incredible difficulties in doing something. That's going to be the pathological part of it. But schizoidness itself isn't. And that's, I think, an interesting point of view to have, especially in our day and age where mental health professionals are going to stigmatize schizoid phenomena, because it's something that's been ingrained as people having primitive defenses, i.e. virtually psychotic. It's not something I believe, but it's a common misunderstanding that early defenses, such as dissociation or withdrawal, is more on the psychotic end of things. And she does say that in some cases, schizophrenia can start by schizoid defenses, but it's not what schizoid is. Schizoid is a way of being into the world, a way in which one is going to be withdrawn in a way, but also creative and also understanding, because that's a whole interesting phenomena, and I've seen this many times as well. Even though people with schizoid disorders or schizoid beings, I'm gonna go with schizoid beings, right? Schizoid beings can be withdrawn. They're also very sensitive, and that's something she points out quite well in the article. Because of the nature of the defenses, the schizoid is going to be very sensitive. It's even going to notice some emotions that other people can't, even extroverted people who are people pleasers, people who have a lot of interactions and seek interactions. They're going to be able to spot what's wrong. And she gives examples of her own clinical cases when she was preoccupied, for example, with breast cancer, and she felt that she was acting normal, and yet one of the schizoid patients picked it up. And that's something I think is clinically very true, that there is a sensitivity to the other. On the surface, it might appear as if there was none, that the schizoid is completely withdrawn, but on the contrary, the schizoid is very present in the relationship at certain points. There's certain points of dissociation, but it's not always, it's not constant within the framework of the relationship. That was something that was very interesting. She also makes it very clear that even though she feels that schizoidness is not an illness per se, it's not more unhealthy mentally than other types of organization, mainly neurotics. She does say that then schizoid are not in neurotic conflicts, they're not into the Oedipal framework, so to speak. They're not into this phenomena where it's going to be conflictedness that's going to be exported. It's more going to be internalized, and the fears can be fears that seem primitive, like the fact that the world around could crumble or break down, and that the gap between reality and fantasy, when it's bridged, can be very anxiety inducing for schizoid people who might feel that they're losing their grasp on reality. So for her, the elements of schizoidness might involve more early defenses, but that doesn't mean that they're ill-er than normal people or neurotic people or psychotic people or borderline people and so on and so forth. It just means that it's different. And I think that's a very good point to have, because often schizoid people can have a creative life, can have relationships. It's just the output is not going to be the same. There's also going to be a lot of phenomena which are maybe hard to understand for mental health professionals, but who are very important for schizoid people, that they're not going to necessarily want admiration, love, or gratification on the surface. That they might even back off from that, try and withdraw from that. But that's not because they don't want the connection. And that's the fundamental error, according to McWilliams, and something I agree with her on, is that DSM makes a fundamental mistake of thinking that the schizoid individual does not want a relationship with the world, wants complete withdrawalness. That's not true. Some schizoids do want relationships, but they don't want those relationships to be based on admiration or blind love. They want those relationships to be deep and profound in ways that often our society does not necessarily push for or allow, even sometimes. Well, the schizoid is going to go for that deepness, that profundity between two humans over the superficial readings expected by society and by certain people. There is also this very interesting phenomena that she's talking about, and that the schizoids are good candidates for psychoanalysis, an idea that Fernburn put forward in his article on the schizoid factors of personality, and something that I find is very true. Because they're so embedded within themselves and in their internal life, they can be very good candidates because they have such a creativity that's often a very good prognosis for psychoanalysis, as it's a very creative therapy. At least that's how I conceive of it, and she seems to conceive of it as well, in that way, in that light. So there is this very, very interesting phenomena that basically they can be very good candidates, but what has to be very important, and what may feel as contradictory, is that they are welcoming of the relationship with the therapist, as the therapist is gonna be non-judgmental, and they're gonna be able to deploy their whole speech, their whole internal world to the therapist without the therapist trying to fix it or to break through it to get to them. Basically, they're welcoming of that Eigenwelt, that inner world. So she doesn't use Eigenwelt, that's me. That's just a German fancy word to mean internal world, right? Right. Okay, so going back to McWilliams and her article, I found that there was so many things that are true, and she destigmatizes the schizoid phenomena so much. And she just points out that it's on a spectrum. Some people are high functioning schizoids in which it would not be picked up by the outside world or even by mental health professionals. And it's very true that often schizoids aren't picked up by mental health professionals. What is picked up are the more superficial symptoms like anxiety, depression, insomnia, and so on and so forth. But the core of schizoidness isn't. And that's something that's very interesting, perhaps also because a lot of schizoids hide it from others. As she goes on to say that basically a professor was once heard a comment about him that he was withdrawn but brilliant. And he was very flabbergasted by the fact that someone said he was brilliant, because he was afraid that would draw people in, that people would want to come and see him, and he not want that. And in a way, that's how I can feel, that the schizoids don't necessarily want people peering into them when they're not in agreement, because remember, good candidates for analysis. So when it's something that they've accepted, they can be very open, but if it's not, they can be very recluse, because they might feel that people might want to hurt them or abuse them. And that was something she points out, that often, not always, but often, there is a genetic sensibility to becoming schizoid, but there's also a lot of childhood trauma and cumulative trauma in childhood that makes the schizoid person more defensive, less willing to interact, because there's a sort of, the French word méfiance, suspicion, comes with the schizoid person, that the others might not understand him or even like him. So there's a distance. And she points out what Feynman points out, that sometimes even the ability to love is seen as wrong, and that how their autonomy is pushed very early by family members. That if they seek love, care, if they express their needs, that is shunned upon, whereas if they are independent, autonomous, self-sufficient, and take care of themselves, that's valorized by the family, that is accepted, that is even gratified to not express your needs. So they internalize that very early, meaning that the relationship, the fundamental core relationship with another human being, is different from others. It's disconnect from humanity, and yet they're still very connected to this sentiment of being part of mankind. As she says that basically so many people have come and seen her sometimes after speeches on schizoidness or on the book she wrote on psychopathology, and how she got them. Which is interesting because she points out that it's always, you got us. Like if the schizoid was in a way in a community of mankind, but a community of his own, of like a schizoid brotherhoodness in a way, which is very interesting because one would think that schizoids are isolated, but then again, they might collectively be able to express who they are through a collective, but a collective that's not physical, but more of a collective category of humanness, which I found very interesting when I read it, and very, very good intellectually speaking. So basically, there is a lot of good things about this article, which is somewhat of a gem, I think, if you want to understand the schizoid phenomena, as basically there's every level of it, of the more high functioning or the more adapted schizoid to the more extreme versions of them, which can be expressed in schizophrenia, catatonia, because she does give all of those examples, and she even gives a funny joke by Harry Gunship that I just love, which is that basically psychoanalysis is a method by schizoids for schizoids, and yeah, I mean, clinically that tends to verify itself. And there's also this very interesting point where she says that according to researcher in Australia, which is Judith. I don't remember her family name, but it's Judith in the text. Well, basically, Judith has found that very, very funnily enough, a lot of male psychotherapists have schizoid elements. And that's very funny. At least I found it very funny when I read it. Another point which is interesting is that she says that one could use it in the Jungian sense of introverted, but she feels that the schizoid has more of a... that introvert is not wrong, but the schizoidness has more of a construct. It's more that we have more knowledge, more precise data and ideas about them, which have developed way, way, way back since basically Fernburn and Harry Guntrip. And that data serves more to us than just introverted, which would imply more broader spectrum, but not necessarily the core ideas of schizoidness. So basically, she ends the article, interesting enough, by saying that she wants this article to be an ambassador for the schizoid groupings, that it's both something in which we can understand them, but it's also something to put them in the spotlight, because she says that often schizoids don't want to be in the spotlight. That's why we know so little about all of that category. And basically this video is a spotlight of the ambassador, at least I hope so. And it's very good. Like, if you ever want to start somewhere, I would really advise you to start with some thoughts about the schizoid dynamics, because it's much more, it's much well explained, because Fernburn and Guntrip are very good, but they're very technical. Like, if you're a layman, I really think you're gonna struggle with Harry Guntrip and Fernburn, whereas this is virtually written for the layman. And not just because I loved it and I'm not a layman at all. So, really good article. You have the core ideas, you have the core concepts, and it's a very interesting read. And because of the personal elements, it's very stimulating, I felt. So basically that pretty much sums it up. Of course, I haven't spoken about all of the elements of the article, because you always have to select, because if not, these videos would be like 40 minutes long or more. So that's not doable for me, but I hope you liked the exposure I gave to the text, and I hope you liked how I represented it. So I'll see you in the next one.